Hi, I'm Paul Brodie, back in the shop. Mitch behind the cameras. You know, my role here, one of the things I do is that I have to choose the content. Mitch shows up and he says, you've heard this before, but I'll tell you again. Mitch shows up and he says, what are we doing? So sometimes it's easy to find content and other times it's not so easy. And I'm at a stage on the BSA now where I'm assembling. I've done all the painting, so I'm assembling. So it's time consuming finding the right length of bolt and things like that. So that's not really a video. So I was looking through the comments and one of the viewers, don't know his name, sorry, he says, why don't you do a video on your jigs and fixtures for the bicycles? So I thought, okay, we can do that. Maybe several years ago we did something like that. I can't remember. So I'm going to show you some jigs and fixtures. So thanks for tuning in. I got a couple frame jigs here. And there's a little bit of a story I can tell you. I made this one in 1985. I was working for Rocky Mountain. I was their mountain bike frame builder and painter for a while. And I knew that I wanted to start my own company, make my own frames. So in my shop in Vancouver off Fraser Street, I did not have a milling machine. And you can see here how there's some slots. So when I loosen this, you see how it slides back and forth. So I needed to mill some slots. So what I did, I had a key for the Rocky shop because I was also the supervisor there, or the foreman, whatever you call it. So I didn't want to get caught, have anyone come by. So I went out to Rocky. It was in Steveston. I went out there on a Sunday morning at 2 a.m. And so from 2 a.m. till 4 a.m., I worked on the milling machine out there. And I was nervous. Nobody came by, but I milled all the slots so that I could make the adjustments. And that's kind of how that happened. So that was 85. And then 30 years later, I was teaching at UFV, and often I had 3 or 4 students. And so it was kind of a tough thing having one jig and that many frame building students. So I made this jig. So 30 years later, I made this jig, and they're pretty similar. And this is the jig for the front triangle. I've got another jig I'll show you that does the chain stays, and then there's another one that does the seat stays. So they're pretty similar. This one is, I don't know if you can see it, this one is longer because frames over the years, especially mountain bikes, they became longer. So head tube goes in here. I got different sizes. The bottom bracket sits here. And then this is the seat tube, and you've got all the angles marked out. Front center measurements. This is the drop, or the bottom bracket height. It's better to have the drop because wheel sizes, they fluctuate a lot now. Anyway, these are the basic jigs, and this frame has done, this jig has helped to make over 4,000 frames. So this had a lot of use, and it's still fine. There's nothing wrong with it. So that's the story on the jigs. Okay, I've got the chainstay jig here, and it's mounted on a stand which has a part of a park stand here. You can probably recognize that. And so it turns around. And the reason that I have it like that is because I can TIG weld it, or I can TIG tack on the stays. And these here on my hand rests. You see that? And I can move this around. I can get them different heights. So if I'm TIG welding, I can weld all around here, and it's easy because as I'm welding it, it's horizontal. And this is just an old Rocky frame. I took it to the I took it to the swap meet and nobody wanted it, so I still have it. So this is what holds the head tube, because when you're, after you have your drawing, you know the height from, or the length from the seat tube that goes down to the dropout. So here there's like a little couple of V blocks here, and what that holds, see all the axles I've got here? I never used to have this many, and then I'd get students and they'd say, well, I want to use this kind of a dropout with this kind of a spacing. So I'd say, okay, and I'd come back to my shop and I'd make up another axle. So I have all different kinds of axles, and this goes onto here like that. That holds the dropouts, and then you can TIG tack everything. And down here you can TIG weld it. So that's pretty handy. So this thing spins around, so don't have a lot of space here, but if I'm on my welding stool, I can do this side on the inside, and then I can do that. So I'm a little different with the jigs, because other people have a frame jig that does everything, but I like it. This suits me better. And it's very nice to have this at this position to be TIG welding. It works really well. Okay, we'll look at the seat stays now, how I do the seat stays, and then we'll go on to other miscellaneous jigs and fixtures. Okay, one thing that's really handy is the bottom bracket cups, and this is what I use to put into the bottom bracket if I'm going to hold the frame in the vise, because then you're not marking up the sides and you can clamp down pretty hard. So these are just made out of old style bottom bracket cups, like out of the 70s and 80s, and all of the threads have been ground off, so it works like this. They fit in there. See, it's kind of a loose fit, doesn't matter. And these are hardened steel, so they last a long time. Okay, so you can make some of those. They don't cost much money at all. So this is the jig for the seat stays. And basically it goes into the bottom bracket. This one looks way too, oh no, it's 135, okay. That should work. And then there's a piece that goes down into the seat tube. And I don't know if I got the right size here. This is, I don't think that's the right size. Anyway, I got different sizes here, but the one that I need, anyway, you can get the idea. This is probably a smaller size than what we were making. We were using a 27.2. So I'll show you how this works. So the jig goes into the dropouts, and then this slides over like that. And that's a little bit of a press fit there. You want to make sure that these are up in the dropouts. And then what that means is that everything is lined up here, and now you can attach your seat stays and do a TIG tack or Braze tack if that's what you're doing. So that's the system I use. I use a jig for the main triangle, chain stay jig, seat stay jig. I'm going to show you a bunch of small stuff now. And then we're going to work on a handlebar stem. I'm going to show you some of the fork jigs and things like that. Now, you know, one thing you have to keep in mind is that a lot of these jigs I made back in 85, 86, around that time, and we didn't have internet then. You couldn't just go on and look up something like, well, it used to be Anvil was sort of the Cadillac of the jigs, and you could go on there, and if you had a good Visa card, you could just order stuff and have it shipped to you, and you'd have a frame jig. But back then, we didn't have that same kind of access to knowledge and information, so I had to come up with whatever I made. So this is my fork jig. And you've got spaces under here for the rake. So if you wanted a different rake, this is about 1 3/4 inches. So this is where the dropouts would go. And the fork gets held like this. Little spring-loaded thing here. And you can see that if the dropouts were in there and I was, I mean, this is bonded, but if you were brazing up a Unicrown or something like that, this is the fork jig. And after the fork was made, we had ways of seeing if it was accurate in alignment. So this is for checking to see if the center line of the steer tube is in line with the center of the dropouts. So you put it in like that. Yeah, then you have to put a spacer under there. You know, because when I was making forks back in '86, it was a Unicrown fork, and you brazed it all up, and then you raked it afterwards. So this, see if the space is the same here, like that. You got equal space on either side, then you know that the fork is aligned this way. So then another check you want to do is you would hold the fork in the vise, and then you would put this up here, and you put this in where the axles are, and then you eyeball this. You eyeball this, that this is in line with that. So I can't see. You can see if it's in line. And if it's not, you can hold it in the vise and you can pull it a little bit. That's called cold setting. And then there was another thing we did. I made up this, and this goes into the dropouts. And this tells you if the legs are equal length. So you look down there and you see if they're, and that looks, I'm looking down there. It's not off like that or anything like that, so it looks pretty good. So those are the different ways of aligning a fork. So using fixtures and things like that. Okay, I'm going to show you a few more things. Okay, these are some fixtures that I made up for when I was working on the Unicrown forks. I really like those Columbus Unicrown forks, so I made these up. And then what happened is the fork blades weren't available anymore. So I looked, but you can't find the same ones anymore because, you know, time has moved on. We got the disc brakes, so you need larger crowns and things like that, larger fork blades. So what this does here, this gets held in the mill, and you can kind of see what happens. This is the Unicrown blade. You can see the mark there that it's left, and the blade comes around and it sits on these three, I don't know, standoffs, I guess you'd call them, or blocks. And then this is the end, and then that goes into the mill vise. And then I can miter the end because everything, all of the blades get held exactly the same way. And then I can use a hole saw and a slotting saw and make that work. So this here, I had some blades and they weren't mitered for the steer tube. So this is what held the blades, and the dropouts went into here, and then this was held in the lathe. I think there's a video we did a few years ago, and so this gets held in the compound. I take off the tool post, and then I got a hole saw in the chuck, and these two Unicrown blades come in like that, using your imagination. And then the hole saw, it cuts. and that's where the steer tube goes. So these are just some of the jigs when I'm making Unicrown forks that I don't make anymore. Okay, this is it's a seat stay fixture jig. And the seat stays are bent like that. You have to imagine. And then I've got a couple plates, and I hold it down with a C-clamp. There's a wedge that goes in there, and then the hole saw comes down here, and it miters for the seat tube. So this is the fixture that miters the seat stay. This is done over 4,000 pairs of seat stays. It's really being used a lot and works fine. Okay, everything's kind of changed, but back in the day, when I was younger, we had to put on the bosses, either a canty boss or a U-brake boss. So this is the dummy axle that fits into the dropouts, like that. And then if we're doing the cantilever bosses, it's this jig, this fixture, and you see how it sets the spacing here. Because it's spacing from the axle up to the boss, that's the constant. And that's how we put on the cantilever bosses. And then if we're doing a U-brake bosses, we just did a video where I changed the bosses, and basically that's for the U-brake boss right there. So a couple different fixtures. This one got made back in '85. This one is more modern. Another thing, if you're a frame builder, you want a selection of some frame blocks. I made these out of hardwood. I got a whole selection of them, all different sizes. This is 1¼ inch, and they're very handy to hold a frame in a vise and not damage the frame. You have to be careful if there's bosses. You don't want to put the boss over like that. It's going to damage the block and maybe the frame too. So I'm just going to show you a couple things on the Braze-ons. So if you're putting on a water bottle Braze-on like that, you need to hold it somehow, because it can shift, and then you might end up with one like that and one like that. It doesn't look good. So there's different ways you can do this. This is just an old coping saw, and I added this bit on and some weights, and that acts like a little bit of a heat sink as well. So you can do that. That works well. And then also made up this thing. I'm going to angle it a bit now. So this works as well. You see what happens there? I've got it a little bit of an angle, and you see how that's offset? That's for the width of the tube. So that works really well also. This is done many, many, many frames. So get the torch, little silver soldering around there. Stuff. Alignment tools. So this is the one. See how I can move that? It stays where it is more or less. There's an Allen screw. You can tighten this. This is old. I made this in '85 as well. So this is for checking the alignment in between the head tube, the seat tube, and the dropouts. So you put it like this. And see how I can move this now a little bit? So can you see that? It's just touching. And then you pull it over here. And hopefully, well, it's out a little bit. Maybe a millimeter, but it's pretty close. So that's one alignment tool, and then I made this one a while ago. And what this one does, it checks how the down tube and the seat tube are off the bottom bracket shell. So let's just have a little look here. So see here, I can move this, and I want to press this against the bottom bracket shell. Pretty close. See how it's just touching? So then you flip the frame over and you do another check. Oh, it's good. Okay, so that's another tool. There's a lot of things you need as a frame builder. Okay, I had to, well, this was recently, I had to rake some forks. I think I was helping Thomas, can't remember exactly. So I made up this, and this got held in the mill. There was a clamp. It clamps the small part of the fork blade, and I had a clamp come up here and press down. And then got the fork blade, and then I put a tube on here, and I raked the fork. And that worked out really nicely, actually. So you can make some things out of wood. This is hardwood, maybe cherry, I don't know. Okay, here's some miscellaneous things. This goes into the mill, and this holds a chainstay because the chainstay at the end has to be mitered, and the chainstay has a taper to it, so you can't hold it in a regular vise because it's got a taper on it. So that's why you have this here. You have to use your imagination again. So this is adjustable here, and it sits into the mill vise at the right height. The chainstay rests on here, and then you can set the angle because this moves in the vise a little bit, so you can make it so that it's holding the tapered tube along that whole length there. That works really well. And then at the shop where we used to build frames, someone else made this, I didn't, but this is for the chainstay bridge tube. And it's just a short little piece that's usually about this long, and you have to miter each end. So they made up this. This is an old seat clamp, an old XT seat clamp, and it closes it up, and that works quite well. It's homemade, shop made, but got used a lot. This is a very handy thing. This is what holds the head tube. I'll put the frame back in here and I'll show you. All right, as you're building a frame, you need to know that the head tube is in line with the seat tube. And how we do that, how I do that, is to have this, I don't know what you call this. Anyway, can you see how there's, it's like a cam. You see how there's a taper there, or a spiral? And this is the matching one. So you got the cones. So you put it into the head tube like that. And you put on this. You lock it. See how there's a bit of movement? And then you pull these and you see how the ramps. So that is solid. So this can go over to the surface table now. You put a couple inch blocks here and here and here and here, and then you know if the frame is in alignment or not. And then on the surface table, I got some hooks that come over top. And then you can put force on the seat tube and get it into alignment. So this is very, very handy. I used to make handlebar stems, and we are going to work on a stem a little bit here. But this is the cap that goes on top of the stem. And I was making these as well because they're very hard to find now. So it's got a radius. Can you see there's a nice radius on the top there. So what I do, how do I make that? I'm in the lathe, and I put this, I mean, this one's all done. I hold that in the 3-jaw chuck, and then I take off the tool post, and then this sits in where the tool post went, or the clamping bit. So you have to imagine that this is spinning round and round, and then can you see how there's a little radius? I just do this by hand very carefully, and that's how I get that nice radius, and then I just polish it. So I don't have to use a file and try and guess the radius. They're all the same using this. This is a pretty neat little tool. I made this handlebar stem, a quill stem, I don't know, a year or two ago, and it got shipped to Germany, and the customer complained that it wasn't straight, but he wasn't measuring it very well, so it got sent back over here, and I put it up on the mill, and I checked it, and it was out maybe, I don't know, ½ a degree. So anyway, it's straight now, because I think we did a video on that. And I've had it at the swap meets, I don't know, 3 different swap meets, and people like the stem, but it does not have the internal cable routing. So I'm going to show you how that works. These are the fixtures for doing the internal cable routing. So I'm going to set this up in the mill. And I can't remember exactly how I did this, but so it's going to be right here. And yeah, see, I can't read. I need some notes or something so I can figure out what I did. Anyway. Oh, got to take out the screw. I think that's how it goes. Anyway, we're going to find out. That goes in the mill. See here, I've got this, and I've got I got 2.5. So I think I center the center drill here, and then I move it 2.5 inches, and then that's going to be the right angle and height. So the piece that goes in it, this is sort of what goes in there. This is the internal cable routing. There's a boss that holds the brake cable, and then this tube comes out ahead of here. And so this is 3/8. So when I started this project, I got a center drill, and I thought, oh, this is great. So I started using it, and it wasn't long. I did a few stems, and the end broke off. So what I did was to re-sharpen it. So I've got my own way of sharpening a center drill. So that's what comes down like that. And can you see that's how long it sticks out? This line here is where the chuck goes to. So what happens is it flexes. So what I did is I made up this. This is probably one of my more interesting jigs. This sits a little bit away from here, probably about here. And this, see this, it's a bit of bronze, and I put a little bit of oil in there, and that sits like that, and it stops this from flexing. So I'm going to set this up in the mill, and then we're going to make a hole, and then you'll see how this all works. Okay, I got a 1/4 inch center drill here, and I'm going to make it fit into that bore. There we go. So I'm going to lock the table in the Y, and then I'm going to zero out the X, and I'm going to move it 2.5 inches. Let's see what happens. if we take out the 1/4 inch center drill, and we put in this guy, so I got a short stem, so I'm going to move it back a bit so that it, I think right about there, that looks good. Okay, I got it set up, so we're gonna see what happens. I got the chuck spinning just over 600 RPM. I got my cutting oil. I got my a support, a bronze here. So let's just see what happens. Been quite a while since I've done this. There you go, there's the smoke. All right, that works. So that's a lot of fixturing just to make one hole, but that's how it is. So that turns out quite nicely, right? That's going to fit that 3/8 cable guide stop. We'll drill one hole there and we'll put it in. Thanks for watching. We appreciate your support. Mitch and I like coffees. If you buy us coffees, it really helps our channel a lot. Please like, subscribe. See you next time.